Everyone. From the start, I'd like to express Queenslanders' sympathies and condolences to the family of Emma Lavelle. And we know that this has been a tragedy, a murder that has shocked Queensland and has shocked everyone. And today we are announcing a range of tougher penalties to address these issues involving youth crime in Queensland. As we've said, and as we know, the Commissioner has said between 5 and 10% of these most serious crimes are committed by these 16 and 17-year-olds. And the time for action is now, and today we are announcing our most comprehensive response to youth crime in this state. So I'll go through them in detail with everyone. We also recognise that community safety has to come first here, and we stand with the community members across Queensland. And I'll tell you now, a lot of people aren't going to like some of these announcements I'm making today, and I'm going to stand by them, and people will be able to judge us on that at the next election. So today I'm announcing the following 10 key points. The first one is we will be increasing the maximum penalty for stealing a car from 7 years to 10 years imprisonment. Secondly, a more severe penalty of 14 years if the offence is committed at night, where the offender uses violence or threatens violence, is armed or pretends to be armed, or is in the company or damages or threatens damage to any property. Thirdly, we will amend the Youth Justice Act, requiring courts to take into account previous bail history, criminal activity and track record when sentencing. This is an amendment to the Youth Justice Act. We will be increasing penalties for criminals who have boasted about these crimes on social media. There will be extreme high visibility police patrols. The Commissioner and the Police Minister will talk about this. We will put in place $9.89 million to fast-track sentencing programs in Brisbane, Townsville, Southport and Cairns, so children spend less time on remand and more time serving their sentences. We will be constructing 2 new youth detention facilities. There will be a trial of engine immobilisers in Mount Isa, Cairns and Townsville. There will be an appointment within the QPS of the Assistant Commissioner to the position of Youth Crime Task Force Commander. These increased penalties will apply to adults as well as juvenile offenders. These are tough measures. They will be put in place, and the community safety, as I said, is paramount here. And today we stand with the community and we stand with the Lavelle family. An absolute tragedy that I know has gripped this state. I'll now hand over to the Police Commissioner, then the Police Minister, and then we're happy to take questions. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I too would like to offer my condolences and sympathies to the Lavelle family through what has been a very, very tragic circumstances for that family over the last few days. The QPS welcomes the government's packages of initiatives announced today. We know that youth crime is an extraordinarily vexed and complex issue. We know that some of the initiatives and strategies have been extraordinarily successful to address youth crime. And I'll give you some examples of that, and I'll talk about that hardcore, high-risk group that we're addressing through these initiatives as well. In the last 10 years, the population of children has increased by about 80,000. However, the amount of offenders have decreased by about 4,000. So we know that the 90% of children that come into the system are diverted, are dealt with very effectively, cautioned. Those strategies and initiatives have been extraordinarily successful over many years. However, we also know that that small percentage of about 5 to 10% are committing up to 50% of the crime. And some of that crime, as we know, is serious high-end offending. And it's this group that we need to deal with the most into the future. In relation to the initiatives that have been announced, as I said, I am very welcoming of them. A full-time Assistant Commissioner will be taken offline, George Marchesini, who will take over the role of Youth Crime Task Force Commander. This role, as you know, has been in part the responsibility of Assistant Commissioner Cheryl Scanlon, who also is the Assistant Commissioner for Ethical Standards Command. But George Marchesini, who has a very, very strong background in youth justice, child safety, is currently a crime coordinator, will take on that role into the future. I welcome the additional funding and resources in relation to the high visibility patrols, and I'll give you an example of how successful it is when you have more capacity and more visibility, more hours, more patrols in the community constantly. Operation Theta, which we only commenced on December 19, was an additional 2,500 shifts that we have allocated, particularly over the holiday period, for high visibility patrols and operation. What we have done in just that 10 days is some 2,863 additional proactive activities and looked at some 1,000 hotspot patrol areas. Already, within that short period of time, in 10 days, we have taken action against 200 juveniles on some 600 charges. So additional officer hours, additional patrols, prevention and disruption activities are extraordinarily successful, and with that additional resource, we will continue to do that. I will leave it at that and answer any further questions if you wish very shortly, but once again, very warmly welcomed the additional initiatives and strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Premier. As I said yesterday, this has been a terrible tragedy for the Lavelle family and our community more broadly. So once again, the thoughts with Emma's family, friends, loved ones around the tragedy that's impacted them, significant tragedy that's impacted them, and of course our thoughts are with them all. The Premier's announced a suite of new initiatives, additional initiatives, which will take another step around enhancing community safety. The government has always been very clear. When it comes to community safety, we will continue to do whatever we can, whatever the evidence supports, to enhance community safety. We will never give up when it comes to community safety, and even one instance of criminal offending is one too many. So the announcements today around tougher penalties, actually bringing the penalties in Queensland for these related offences to amongst the toughest in the nation, reinforces the government's commitment to community safety. In addition, the resourcing around additional high visibility, extreme high visibility patrols for the Queensland Police Service will build on this success of the operation that we're seeing already. This will become a year-round resourcing opportunity for the Queensland Police Service. In addition, the strengthening of those sentencing principles, the changes to the Youth Justice Act, will see more young people in custody for longer on sentence, so that they can complete the programs required by the courts to ensure that they have the best chance of rehabilitation. This is an important change. These are initiatives which the government is committed to, and we fundamentally believe will take the next step around enhancing community safety. And I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the efforts to date already of our police officers, of our support agencies, of our government organisations in working hard to support community safety. These initiatives will back them in, but will also go some way to further enhancing community safety and building a safer community for all of us.
Thanks. We're happy to take some questions.
No.
The community demands this, and we've responded.
Whose recommendations were these?
Sorry?
Who's recommended these suite of measures?
I've made that decision, and there have been consulted with our key relevant ministers.
Both ministers over the past few days
Yep.
have said no changes, no review at this stage. So what did change? Did the community get angry enough?
I've made this decision. I'm announcing them today.
Can you explain why don't you make breach of bail an offence as the opposition repeatedly called for? And how will these changes around the bail actually keep people,
Thanks.
keep young offenders
Yeah,
accountable?
so we put in place a presumption against bail, which is actually stronger, but now the courts, with the amendment to the Youth Justice Act that we're announcing today, must take into account their previous history. That is fundamental, it is stronger, and the community demands that, and we're actually going to deliver that. So that'll be introduced when Parliament goes back in February.
The GPS trackers that have been trialled, only about 4 people have hasn't fitted. That's been a fail, hasn't it?
I'll get the Minister to talk to you about that. That was recommended out of the Bob Atkinson report. What we're announcing today are the strongest measures for youth justice that we have announced in this state.
If these measures were in place a week ago, do you think the terrible incident we saw on Boxing Day would be prevented?
I can't go back and predict what could or couldn't have happened. It is an absolute tragedy. It's just horrific. Can I just say, I think every family in this state absolutely feels for the Lavelle family. No one wants that to happen. No one wants to lose a loved one under those circumstances. Everything we can do, we are doing.
But given that these were clearly in response to that incident and these changes, did you look at that and think how would we have prevented that from happening, and then is that reflected in these changes?
I think this is a comprehensive suite of reforms that is addressing a very prevalent issue in our community.
Given that the police minister said yesterday afternoon there will be no changes, is it fair then to say that the government's come up with this literally overnight?
That is incorrect. We have been working on some of these reforms, and today I have announced the complete package.
So you were working on them prior to the Lavelle incident?
No, as I said, there are a number of programs, for example, like the immobilisers that we were talking about previously, but we have put together this suite that we are announcing today.
Part of these increased sentences, and there's always a separation of powers, but how do you get the judiciary to implement them?
Well, can I say this? Can I say this? It's going to be up front and be frank. The courts need to do their job. The courts need to do their job.
What
Is
do
that
you
they're
mean by
not
that?
pointing to them, because so often we see the maximum penalty, which is now increased, not even enforced, so increasing the maximum penalty.
But now they'll be taking into account the previous history and the bail history of these offenders.
Do you think the courts are failing? Is that what you're saying?
There is separation of powers, and you've heard my comment, and I stand by my comment.
What are the increased penalties for those social media posts that we see so often, particularly those like north side, south side gangs stealing the cars? What are they, and how much power does the government have to actually put pressure on Instagram and Facebook to take those
Yeah, I might
posts
get
down?
the police minister, because he has been working on this. So, Mark, I'll get you to address that one. Thank you.
Thank you. And firstly, and you know, Jess, got a lot of respect for you. I wouldn't normally correct you here, but you know, what I said yesterday would be naive for a government to ever rule out any changes to legislation. So I didn't say that there'd be no changes. No, I said it would be naive for a government to say that there wouldn't be any changes. So, but
You
I
also said there'd be no review at this stage.
well, I'm happy to check the transcript. Happy to check the transcript on that. But in respect of your question, Brendan, it'll be a circumstance of aggravation in respect of those offending. So if you're posting about the offence that you're doing, that will obviously be taken into account by a court when sentencing. So circumstance of aggravation would usually mean that you would have a more severe penalty.
And so many times as well, though, if you do report those posts, Instagram will say, you know, it doesn't go against community guidelines. Is it a difficult process for the government to actually extend powers to have those posts down? Because obviously the main reason is they steal the car, they get that notoriety between different gangs and what have you when they
Yes.
post online.
Yeah. There's a lot of cooperation that happens with the federal government and the e-safety commissioner, as well as also the social media companies on this. The e-safety commissioner particularly has good working relationships with them, and often state law enforcement agencies will make requests of the e-safety commissioner to assist with getting those posts removed. Obviously, it's a jurisdictional issue for states to be able to legislate against telecommunications devices and those social media companies, but the working relationship we've got is a good one, and we rely on that one. But where the states can have some influence is the sanction that applies to people who are engaging in the criminal behaviour and using social media to promote that criminal behaviour, and that's what today's announcement addresses.
You said the courts need to do their job. What's preventing them from performing their duties now?
We will strengthen the Youth Justice Act that they must take into account that previous bail history. So, you know, they have the facts before them. The facts aren't before me. The facts are before the courts. So it's up to them to make the decisions. And community safety should be paramount in that.
Can you explain, what does that mean? How much more time will they serve as a result of these changes?
Well, we'll be working through the finer details, and they will be introduced into Parliament during the first sitting week.
Where will the new youth detention centres be built?
Yep, we are finalising the locations, and they'll be announced in the near future. But we do need 2 new capacities. I've already announced one will be in Cairns and one will be in the southeast of the state.
Aren't we just creating...
No, that's not suitable.
Career criminals?
Sorry?
Aren't we just creating better criminals and career criminals with these new laws?
How?
Coming down, you're not getting to the root of the problem.
Well, I think we are. I mean, we now have a dedicated Assistant Commissioner that is going to be focused on youth crime. We've got high visibility patrols going out in the community. This is what the community expects. It's unsuitable. We've been through all of those issues previously. It is not built to be a detention facility.
The engine immobiliser, so would
Yes.
that be private cars that people apply to have fitted at the cost of the government?
Yeah, all of those details, it'll be up and running by mid-next year. The Police Minister is going through all of those details at the moment. But there is evidence to suggest that they do work, so we are working through all of those details, and we've allocated money so the program can be rolled out.
So that would be a private person who could apply to get a...
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Will the GPS trackers continue?
I'll get the Youth Justice Minister to comment on that. Okay?
Thank you. In regard to the GPS trackers, what we've seen is that the take of those trackers, and you commented on a figure before, it's greater than that, has not been as low as it may have been because they've been remanded to custody. So courts, there's a clear principle in the Act, and we introduced and clarified that again last year, that we expect the community to be kept safe from repeat offenders. And when they've come before the courts, it is an option to the courts. It was an additional tool to the courts that the GPS monitoring could be an option, but they have actually remanded them to custody. And we have had up to an additional 100 young people in detention, and they're serving longer. The Bob Atkinson review noted that that measure was still a measure that should be continued. It was a tool that we should continue to have and look at, and we stand by that measure still at this point.
You said that number was wrong. Do you have the figure of how many have been fitted?
The last update I saw in the Youth Justice Task Force was 9, but I would like to clarify and ensure that's correct. We can get that back to you.
I think this is something, if it expires after 2 years, those monitoring devices, are you going to extend the trial beyond that period?
I think it's for government to consider, I think we spoke about this previously, Jack, at this point our position is our position in regard to that being a very important and additional tool for the courts to have, and a tough measure. Stand by that. We were heavily criticised by some in the community that that was too tough a measure, but as the Premier said, we will always ensure community safety. It was an additional tool, and if there are any changes, that will be announced in due course.
Will there be any diversionary measures accompanying these new justice measures?
I think what's important to know, and to take your question earlier, that we know that community safety is one of the most important responses and responsibilities government has. These are tough measures, we stand by them, and we know that we have received some criticism that those tough measures have resulted in more people in detention. We stand by that. When a young person's a risk to community safety, we stand by the fact they should be remanded. But we also know the community expects that we are investing in evidence-based initiatives to break the cycle of offending. The announcements last February came alongside additional funding for things like intensive case monitoring. Evidence shows you need to have supervision, ongoing supervision and intervention. We stand by those initiatives and will continue investing in those. We know complex problem, you have to have a multifaceted response.
Sorry,
I was going to say, this is the second lot of youth justice reforms that this government's done in 2 years. Are you going to do a review of these ones once they're implemented?
Well, it's not only the second tranche of reforms in 2 years. This government has continued to invest in additional measures, capacity measures, and invest in evidence-based initiatives because offenders, their profiles, their behaviours, they aren't static, and we are a government that listens. So we have always said that we will continue to review and ensure that these measures are effective, and if more needs to be done, it will be done. And again, we have a Premier that has always led from the front on this, been very resolute, and again is announcing additional measures.
Can we ask you about the youth bail houses? What function do they serve?
We don't have youth bail houses in Queensland. There was a clear decision some years ago that they were closed.
Yeah. And so do you know what facility the accused was staying in? Was it government funded?
So obviously it's the subject of a current investigation, all those sorts of details, and I cannot comment on the issue at North Lakes. But we don't have bail houses in Queensland.
And if we're still in a difficult position whereby you're going to have to come up with reforms every time, unfortunately, a terrible crime happens perpetrated by a youth offender, it's a bit of a pattern now.
Well, what's clear and what the pattern is the Premier and our government listens. And as I've travelled across Queensland, the community has said that they want to know that we are investing in the things that work and that we will respond. And that's what this government does every single time. That's what this Premier does every single time. If there is a case for needing to do something more or differently, then we act. And that's what we're doing here today. We will continue to invest in the evidence-based measures that we have to intervene, reduce offending, stop it before it happens, like co-responder. But if more needs to be done, it will be done. And I know there will be those in the community that will criticise this as being too tough. But we stand by that. The Premier has been clear she stands by that, and everybody in this government stands by that.
So is that not then an admission that things are getting worse? Because why would you have implemented these reforms after the last year's Australia's Day?
This is an admission that you never stand still. We will never arrive at the perfect outcome. You have to always listen to community, and you have to always respond, whether it's in the issue of crime, youth crime, or other things. This is a government that listens, and we act. And the community has been clear, and the Premier has said that they are concerned and they want to see action. And we listen to the community, we respond, and we respond resolutely. And that's what you're hearing today. These are extensive measures, and we stand by those measures because that is what the community is calling for. That is what we will do, and we are responding.
Commissioner, when we spoke, sorry, just wanted to get on.
Thank you.
I just have one more for the Minister, if I can. When you spoke the day after the incident, you indicated it wasn't a day for politics and there would be no review at this stage. Can you fill us in on how we've come to this point today?
Like the Police Minister said, when questions were put to me about will there be changes, it wasn't the time for that. It wasn't, and I was asked to respond to a question from the opposition, it wasn't the time for politics. And my comments were, as they are today, that we are grieving with the family, that our heart goes out to the family, but I come back to you never stand still. If additional reforms are needed, then you reform, and that's what the Premier has announced.
Thank you. Yes.
Do you think the work of the courts are meeting community expectations?
Look, that's really not up to me to answer. Obviously, they are independent and they make their decisions. What I do believe, though, the justice system for children needs to strike a balance. And we do know that 90% are dealt with extraordinarily well. The evidence is clearly there. But there are some offenders, some high-end, violent, serious offenders, 16 and 17-year-olds, that the only way to disrupt their behaviour and their offending is to be in detention. And what I would like to see, and the project, one of the projects is addressing this, is that if you can sentence closer to the time of offending, there's a greater impact. And if we can have these children go through their intensive programs and have, better assurances about that offending before they're released, that is the issue. We are talking about serious offending here that needs to be dealt with that way.
Commissioner, I appreciate you can't go into too much detail of this particular case, but the house where these boys seem to have been arrested from, where one was residing, is that forming part of your investigation whether or not there were police checks at that property?
Yeah, definitely. The investigation is quite broad, as you can understand. We are into 72 hours, so there is a lot of work still to be done. We will look at every aspect of where those children were days before, as well as the time of the offence, what they were doing at that time. So all of that will be picked up in this investigation.
That Youth Crime Task Force commander, is that a different role or is it just a change in personnel?
Slightly different. It's a full-time dedicated role, so I expect the commander to dedicate their whole time to all of the suite of initiatives that we currently have, plus the new ones that have just been announced. George Marchesini has extensive background in youth justice as well as child protection, and is currently the regional crime coordinator in the southern region. So extensive experience. So I expect him to travel extensively to where we have our collaborative panels currently working, our co-responder models, and to also give advice back as to what we feel, what is working and what else needs to be changed to address, some of the issues that we're talking about.
Premier, just on some other issues. Okay. Should the private owners of coal-fired power stations be compensated for the losses they incurred during the coal price cap?
This was worked out at National Cabinet, and my understanding is that, yes, that is the case.
That's appropriate, you think?
Yes.
Yes, and when the state government agreed to implement the coal price cap, were you aware that the compensation for Gladstone Power Station could reach as high as $450 million?
We have been working through all those details. Our Treasury has been working through that with State Development and Premiers, and there will also be compensation for householders as well.
When you agreed to
Yeah, all of the
that was a ballpark figure?
Well, all of that was worked out when we reached the agreement we reached. So yes, we did know.
Will you recall Parliament early to implement these?
No, that's just a stunt. Parliament will be considering this when we resume in February, and hopefully the opposition will help us fast track them.
All right, we've talked a lot about offenders today, but what's the government doing to support victims better? Would you consider making a minister for victims, for example?
Most of those issues are currently looked after under the Attorney General's portfolio, as you can appreciate. But of course, today we are listening absolutely to the family.
The bad laws come into place on Sunday. Are you confident that everything's ready to go?
Yes, the Health Minister updated Cabinet on those reforms, and yes, we are confident they will be ready.
And Premier, how do you respond to the concerns from the church-run hospitals and aged care homes that they'll be powerless to stop voluntary assisted dying on premises when the patient can't be moved?
If they have any issues, they should be speaking with the Health Department.
And is it true that when people undertake bad, the cause of death that will be listed on their death certificate won't be bad, but it's the underlying health condition, like cancer?
I'll have to check that out for you. I'll get the Health Minister to get back to you on
Will
that.
you be doing a cabinet reshuffle in the new year?
No, it's not my intention. No.
Premier, just on COVID, China is opening up travel very soon. Is there a fear that it could cause a spike in cases here in Queensland, and what's the advice?
I've had no advice from the CHO about that. We have countries all around the world that have opened up to COVID, and I'll be getting advice just like every other Premier from their Chief Health Officer.
Do you think Australia should place testing requirements or sanctions like America or Italy or Malaysia?
Well, that's a matter for the federal government, and my understanding is that the Prime Minister has said that he won't be putting any restrictions on. It's my understanding.
Just one more on that.
Yeah.
Just one more on
Yeah.
that. Yourself and your senior ministers have lobbied the previous federal government and the current federal government
Yes.
to change the telehealth
Yes.
law. They haven't done that. Now Queensland Health will be forced to supply doctors all around the state. Prosecutorial direction could be issued by the DPP. That hasn't happened.
I know that there are conversations that are happening between the State Health Minister and the Federal Health Minister in relation to that.
Frustrated though that they haven't done anything on this? It's a pretty easy law to change.
Well, they're a new government. They're getting their feet on the desk, and I know that the issue has been raised.
When do you think we'll see some?
You'll have to ask the Minister.
Premier, can I just ask you about the petition? Are you familiar with it? It's going around 30,000 signatures calling for Emma's law, and will you consider that?
The suite of reforms that we have announced today, I believe, will give reassurance to Queenslanders that we are listening and we are acting. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.